All right, we've talked about some principles for storytelling and for making presentations. Now let's talk about the actual content, what's going to go in your pitch. So this presentation is called The Art of Pitching. So what goes in my deck? You're going to talk first about your problem customer. You're going to include probably your total addressable market. Covering up the cool card trick. You're going to explain your value proposition, talk about your solution, your unfair advantage, the channels, how we make money, and then you're going to include something along the lines of the future is bright, come join us. So, start by introducing your problem or customer. Oftentimes, this will be in this form of a story. You know, this is Bob. And you can talk about the problem Bob faces, right? Really get us into the shoes of that customer. This is particularly important if you have a problem that judges are unlikely to be familiar with. So one of the teams in the MOA, I forget if it was the MOA or the BMA, but anyway, one of the teams was focused on the problems around suntan sprays. And the fact that they streak when they come in contact with water. Well, that's not a problem that I have ever encountered or am familiar with at all. And so the team did a really good job, though, explaining why this was a problem for this particular customer segment, what caused it. They used a story that really illustrated it well. It was about a woman who got a spray tan and then her boyfriend broke up with her and she was crying, and so there's tear streaks down her face and she just looks like a tiger at this point because the tan came off right on the tear lines. So even though we were, or at least I was unfamiliar with the problem of streaking and spray tans, it was very easy to wrap my head around it because they gave a very clear story and a concrete description of exactly what this problem was and how much money it could cost and why this was an issue. So be cognizant of who your audience is and make sure that they can get a clear picture of exactly what's going on. This is an easy place to add your addressable market. Bob is not alone. It turns out there's 80,000 people every month who get spray tans. I made up that number, but it's just an easy place to drop in how many people also face this problem. And then you can explain your value proposition. So this is not a super strict formula, but just something along the lines of we are X, our product or service helps this customer segment by decreasing their pain and increasing their gain. Just some sort of introductory statement that should be pretty fast. And then you want to jump immediately into here's how it works. One mistake I've seen as teams pitch is they'll hold off in explaining their solution. And I think what happens is they're very familiar with their solution. They forget that their audience is not familiar with their solution. So if you'll recall the robot example, part of the challenge was we had no idea what that guy was talking about for at least half his presentation. We didn't know what the robots were. We weren't familiar with farming. We had no idea what was going on. And the very worst thing that can happen is, a judge says to you at the end, the first question during Q&A is, what is your product or service? And then that you've messed up. You haven't explained it clearly. So early on, as soon as you've explained that problem in that customer segment, maybe how many there are, and your one-liner about your value proposition, jump into exactly what you do, how it works. And it may be helpful here to add little figures or sort of a drawing of the process, like map the process out, depending on how complex your model is. Just make it crystal clear again exactly what your product or service does. From here, you've got some options. You could jump straight into the unfair advantage like I've done here. You could jump straight to channels. You might even jump straight to the business model. So these last, the unfair advantage, the channels, the business model, there's not a super strict sequence for how these go. I've put the unfair advantage next because you're already talking about what your solution is, so it seems to make sense to jump into the competitors at this point. But it probably depends a lot on your particular customer service. So feel free. The first couple slides I would keep fairly consistent in terms of the order: problem, customer, solution. After that, you've got a little more leeway in the order. Just make sure you check all the boxes, that you cover all the bases. So, here's the existing competition. Here's how we're different. A nice way to do this is like we talked about earlier in the semester, just graph it out. It's easy to capture visually, value for the money and whatever your basis for competition is, however you're creating value for your customers. And then you can show, we're way up here, competitor one's over here, competitor two, and you could have their logos on there. If you do this, make sure that you've shown it to other people and that they agree with your classifications. Your judges are perceptive. They're going to be familiar with the companies, a lot of your competitors. You don't want them arguing with you mentally about where, Walmart fits on your graph. So think through pretty carefully what's the right basis of competition, and where exactly you would put your competitors. Even better on the unfair advantage section, here's how we're different. Even better is to say, here's why we can't be copied. So getting back, really the unfair advantage isn't just why we're different, but it's really what stops somebody else from copying us. And this may be something about your solution itself. Maybe you've got intellectual property or trade secrets. It might be something about, it might be something about, your customer loyalty. It may be something about switching costs. Like, what is it that makes it difficult to copy what you're doing? Then we jump into channels. Here's how we reach our customers. So you're going to include things like, what are you communicating to your customers? What's the message? And this can be done throughout your presentation. This is really all about your branding and the imagery that you show, the phrases you're using to describe your product or service. You want to talk about the channels that you're using. Is this social media or is this print ads? Is this, spots on podcasts? Is this a blog? Like what are you doing? Where are your customers talking and how are you going to reach them? How are you going to join the conversation that community is already having? You'll want to address your cost of acquiring customer, the lifetime value of a customer. This is one where it gets a little fuzzy if you want to deal with cost of acquiring customer and lifetime value of customer here, if you want to go ahead and wait till you get to the revenues. In many cases, it probably makes sense to wait till you get to the revenues. But, again, there's some flexibility here in terms of the order. And of course, you need to address how we make money. So you'll talk about the business model. Are you a multi-sided platform? Are you a freemium model? Like, how does this work? Again, you might have to, similar to this solution, it's often helpful to kind of lay things out. This is a subscription model. People pay X dollars up front. They pay X number of dollars every month. Or, this is exactly what you get for free. Here's the premium version. So explain to us how this works. How do you make money? Talk about what you estimate your revenues will be. Talk about your margins, again, what are your profits? What are your costs? What do the unit economics look like? Walk us through a single transaction. That might be the single best thing you can do, is just walk us through one transaction, one customer making one purchase, and show us how these costs break down. Some hints on the how we make money section. This is about sausage, not sausage making. So please don't walk through, the worst thing you do is put up a spreadsheet and say, okay, here's the 87 assumptions. And if we go through that, like, you'll lose everybody in the audience if you try to do this. Just tell us, your margins are $4.50 or my margins are 60%. Don't worry about every calculation. If you want a hint at the things that went into calculating this, maybe do that verbally rather than even put it on the slide. People will either look at the slide or listen to you. They probably won't do both, which is why this, video slide setup's a terrible thing, but what do we do? That's why I also give you the slides to look back through on your own. So during Q&A, so if you are doing it verbally, you might say, okay, we considered the cost of X and Y, and given that, we think that our margins are going to be approximately $4.50. Graphs and and then during Q&A, is if they ask, talk to me more about your margins, then you can dive in and say, okay, here's the assumptions we made, here's what we did. graphs and visuals are really useful in this section. So I've seen people, for example, this is just one example, but use a pie chart, say, here's all our costs, you know, and they'll have a circle, and then you'll be able to see that like 80%, you know, of the pie, or I guess 80% would be a lot more, 80% of the pie is, you know, customer acquisition costs. That's the primary driver. Then we've got all these other tiny costs, and it shows that, yes, we've thought about what all these costs are, but it's very easy to communicate that 80% of our costs are all about customer acquisition. Finally, use nice round numbers. So if your estimate is $47,000, 564 or $47,564, just say 50,000. It'll make it easier for all of us. So go ahead and round to reduce the amount of pain that we're going through to comprehend what you're telling us. And then finally, you can conclude by saying, hey, the future is bright. Come join us. You know, this is that point where you say, hey, here's some of the things we're looking forward to. You know, we're considering expanding to these customer segments, or here's other ways that, you know, that these are some reasons why we're really optimistic about the future. Just one or two quick statements there, and you know, something to close out. You know, you can repeat your name. Again, we're Company X, and we're grateful for your time today. Any questions? You know, we thank you for your time, whatever it is. Well, before I get to Q&A, I guess a couple of other things. In this class, we are not having you make a specific ask in terms of investment. We're not worried about the valuation of your company. You know, on the I guess I didn't put break even here on the how we make money. You know, you can talk about break even. You might even say, here's how much we need to get off the ground. But we're not asking you to say, you know, we're asking for $2.2 million for an implied, you know, for 45% equity stake with an implied valuation of XYZ. We're not doing that. You will do that in 401, but that question comes up. Well, let's jump over to Q&A. Anticipate the obvious. You know, if you've got a freemium model, you know, what do you anticipate your conversion rate will be? If you have a product or service that might have some risk, have you looked into the legal liability? Like, think about what the biggest risks are, and I would address those directly in the presentation, but be ready to expand during Q&A on the most obvious things. These are often things that are simple, like, you know, what evidence do you have that your customers, you know, that your customers really want or need this, that this is a real problem? What evidence do you have that this solution works, and so on and so forth? I would suggest deciding who's going to answer by topic. So if you get a question on economics, then it's going to be this person. If it's channels, this person. And the key here is one person should answer each question. There's a limited time for Q&A, and the problem we see is that sometimes the judges will ask one question, everybody on the team will answer it, and that's pretty much all the time you've got for Q&A. So instead, just let one person answer the question and then take the next question. I guess the other thought, and I didn't sprinkle this throughout, but all the way through, include your validation in there. When you are on the you know, the channels, talk to us about the Facebook ad that you ran. When you're talking about when you're introducing the customer segment, you know, and you're saying Bob's not alone, talk about the surveys that you did and the interviews. You know, tell us how you know these things. You don't need to go into a lot of depth, but you want to make the validation super clear. That's going to be one of the primary things that the judges use to evaluate your pitch. Again, just final thoughts. The judges are going to be looking for the validation. They're going to be looking for, you know, why should we believe you? What evidence do you have? You know, how credible are you? And half of that is the evidence you present, and the other half is just your own, the way that you present, right? So you're going to come off as more or less credible depending on how you talk, how you interact, how you respond to questions. So be prepared and practice. The more you practice this pitch, the easier it will be to be professional, to be polished, and to be sharp. So with that, good luck. I look forward to seeing all of your final pitches very soon. And yeah, take care.